So we might get started, everyone. It's 7 and we've got the live stream just up and running. This is a workshop to talk about council and committee meeting structure, and I think Kate Leighton has a short PowerPoint presentation for us, which I think is now shared on. You should be able to see it if you're viewing live from YouTube. You should be able to see that shared screen. So firstly, welcome everyone. Welcome to staff who are here, elected members. We have Councillor Davies, Councillor Kosh, Councillor Goldstone, Councillor Little, Councillor Hughes and Councillor Samble here, and myself. And we have the senior leadership team and Kate, our minute, we don't really have a minute taker, but Kate will be doing her presentation. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on Kaurna land this evening. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. So as I said, this workshop session has been convened for the purpose of discussing council and committee meeting structures. This is an information sharing forum. It's not for the purpose of debating issues or building consensus position or otherwise discharging council's deliberative and decision-making functions. They sit within properly convened committee meetings and also council meetings. We don't have anyone in the gallery, but I'm sure we do have some people viewing with us this evening. We don't have a set agenda and we don't take minutes for these particular sessions. If we could turn our phones on silent, please, or turn them off. Or if you need to take a call, please take it outside. It's quite disrespectful to be on your phone when we're in the middle of a session. We won't be going into confidence, or as far as I'm aware, there's no real need for that this evening. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Kate. You've got a microphone? Okay, so I'll ask you to really speak into it so it can be heard properly by people who are viewing on YouTube. And I might remind you every now and again if I can't hear you properly. Okay, so Kate will present I think it's just a beginning few slides just to set the scene for this workshop. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. All right, the everyone's flashing, so I don't think we'll trust that for too long. So it's just a few introductory slides really to kind of guide the conversation. Obviously this workshop was a result from the report that was presented last year and the desire of the Chamber to have a conversation around the current meeting structure, the requirements around the legislation and what would be conducive to the Chamber moving forward, the current structure or potentially any changes. So our current structure, which is on the screen, so obviously we have our council meeting once a month as required under the Local Government Act. We've got an Audit Committee, which is also required as part of the legislation, and a range of Section 41 committees to assist council in its decision making. So we've obviously got the Corporate Community Services, Infrastructure and Environment Services Committee, the Youth Advisory Committee, Gawler Heritage Committee, and the CEO Performance Management Panel. And we've also obviously got the Council Assessment Panel, which falls under the Planning and Development and Infrastructure Act. We've got a range of working groups as well, as resolved by Council, the Elderly Centre Advisory Group, the Climate Emergency Action Plan Working Group, and the Reconciliation Action Plan Working Group. So our current structure, obviously, as presented as part of that report last year, the number of meetings held across the last few years as was presented, and the number of reports as considered by each of those committees. And we can have a chat about that in more detail if you would like. We did present as part of that report, which was based around the desire to look at a potential second council meeting each month to reduce the number of special council meetings. So this was a calendar that was projected for the 2021 year, based on our current council and committee structure. With an additional meeting, we showed what that would potentially look like and how that would impact the calendar for the number of meetings. So that was to keep the current structure for committees and add a second council meeting. An option to potentially reduce the committees but add a second council meeting would then potentially look something like that. So that would be the impact on the diaries for council member and potentially a majority of the executive team as well. So the requirements under the legislation is at least one ordinary council meeting a month, as we've said. It does allow for council to establish committees under section 41, and we are required under section 126 to have an audit committee meeting. Before the implementation of the Planning and Infrastructure and Development Act, we were required to have a strategic planning committee, but we no longer have that requirement now that the Development Act is obsolete. So they are the minimum requirements for council. Obviously, those committees operate under the Local Government Act, the Local Government Procedures at Meetings Regulations, and we've got a code of practice for our council committee meetings and a code of practice for our working groups, which primarily are based on the Procedures at Meetings Regulations. And then we can, if you'd like, talk about the functions of our current committees. Obviously, the terms of reference will set each of the functions for those various committees and will dictate the membership requirements, meeting dates, etc. So I'm not sure if there's anything else in detail or any of the committees that you would like to look through the functions, but we do have all of them up there if you wanted to pull any of them up, but happy to hand over to Henry or the Mayor or talk through those functions if you'd like in more detail.
Just keep going.
Yep.
Just keep going. Okay.
So the IES, obviously the Public Works, Traffic Management, etc. Audit Committee, so reviewing annual financial statements, proposing and providing information.
Just go back one slide.
Yep.
Okay. Yep.
Audit Committee. So strategic financial management planning, financial reporting.
Why would you think that?
Just use your, if you can use your mic, we've got live streaming. So.
Okay, thanks, Kate.
Yep.
Just on that, can somebody give me I suppose a background on why that's a requirement under the Act? Why would that be a requirement under the Act while the others? I can understand why the IES isn't anymore, but why do you think that's important?
It's included in the Act. I mean, it's prescribed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting is why it's important that we have this committee and potentially why it's important that councillors be on this committee. That's where we're coming from.
Well, one of the core functions of a council member is to keep the activities of council under review, but also you could easily argue the core role of a council member is to ensure that council is financially sustainable, and an audit committee assists you in that function. That's my view on that. Yeah, proposing, reviewing, exercise of powers under section 130A. Oh, Nathan.
Just on the IES, are we able to go back to the IES or even the CCS? Are we able to get some commentary around, I mean, we see A through to L there. Can we get some commentary around delegated powers and, you know, what those items actually are, and you're only allowed to recommend to council over delegation of decision?
So council has decided as part of the delegations to give delegated powers to both CCS and IES. They are slightly different, obviously, depending on the functions of the committees. So both of those committees do have the ability to adopt policies as it relates to the functions of the committees. They do have the ability to recommend pieces of work for community consultation. They're unable to adopt strategic management plans, so at the final point of each of those plans, and that's something that is referred back to the council in its entirety, so full council. It is up to each council what they choose to delegate to the committees or not. Having the range of committees without any delegated powers, I think, is up for discussion. I don't think it's necessarily conducive if you've got those committees without having any delegated power. But again, it is something that is the council's choice on how they wish to exercise those powers. But
so just a follow up. I do look at those items, and under those topics, nothing's stopping one of those topics being slipped onto a council agenda in the first instance by administration.
No, so generally those conversations we would have, and Henry would be involved with the executive team. If the committee, it is the function of the committee, it would go to the committee as a first preference. If they've got delegated power, then they've got the ability to make that decision, but they don't have to make that decision. It could always be a decision that this is an extremely hot topic for the council, or there's going to be a lot that might go with it, whether it be financial, reputational, at the point that the committee might decide to not exercise that delegation and they might refer it to council. The administration might decide that it is better placed to send it straight to council, or there might be time constraints that dictate that it will go straight to council rather than to a committee. So just because a committee has the delegation, they don't have to exercise it, but the point of having the committee is to try and expedite and try and get business done as soon as practical for council in a reasonable manner.
And I note that we're not getting much on our IES committee agendas, yet we have a broad scope to discuss many items on the IES agenda. My question is, why aren't we using the committee to its full scope?
If I could respond firstly to Nathan's comments. So our priority is to put reports that relate to the scope of the committees to those committees. But given the sequence of the committees, which is every couple of months, if there's an item that's a time critical matter, then we will present the report to council. In terms of using the committees to their full capacity, I think we do. I think the agendas that have been presented to the committees have been fairly intense, and it's only by default where there's a time critical issue that we will then otherwise present a report to council.
I don't think they are used to their full extent. That's been my observations. Councillor Goldstein?
Has it always been the case that pretty much every council member is on both committees, or is that a more recent thing?
That's been recent in my experience. Not everyone's on the CCS. Everyone currently is on the IES, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the IES, as you can see, covers some quite serious matters, and I think certainly when I was a councillor, nearly every member, bar one or two, were on the IES. So, yeah, that's over 12 years. I don't know what your experience has been as an employee of council, Kelvin. You've got longer.
Well, I've got to say, in most cases, it's been probably half the elected members on committees. So you may have half a dozen or so, because otherwise you get this criticism of the committee recommending to itself, if it's made up of the total council members. But the other issue with the peeve of mine is, of course, that when you discuss something at committee, you have a frank discussion, come to a decision, and then you get to council and you have the same debate again. So we're wasting time on having one item discussed at two different meetings. So I don't know if there's a way around that, but, you know, I could understand it if there was only, say, 6 members on the IES meeting and a number of councillors hadn't heard the debate. But when we've all heard the debate and then it goes to council and we have another debate, but yeah, I don't know if there's a way around that, but it's just a pet peeve.
Well, I mean, people have a right to bring things up. If say, for example, if the decision doesn't go a councillor's way, they've got every right to bring it up, and that's part of the politics around bringing items up over and over again. You don't have to debate things twice, but that's the Act as well that allows people to do that. Councillor Davies?
So firstly, do we have any stats around, for example, the average length of an IES meeting and the average length of how long it takes us to get through council meetings and that sort of thing at the moment? Because my observation is that it takes us, I don't know, like 7.5 hours on average or something to get through a council agenda. If you add them up, and then, you know, sometimes we have CCS meetings that go for an hour, or I'm just curious what the, you know, what the balance is there, and whether maybe a higher proportion of things could be shifted over to one to balance out the other.
Yeah, certainly I think nearly every council meeting is quite long. There's at least 14 or 15 officers' reports, plus recommendations from committees, plus motions, plus, and yeah, they're quite heavy. It is, when you've got a 3-hour limit, most councils across the state, or some councils across the state, if you look at Brossa, they go 8 hours during the day. Northern Areas Council have a daytime council meeting and it goes all day. Now, they don't have much on their agendas compared to us. They're not growth councils. So, yeah, my view is the committees could be doing some more work. Yeah, we've got the structure there, but I don't know what the stats are. I don't think we've got have we got those stats?
We do keep a spreadsheet of the stats, which gives us the average time in minutes for each of the meetings. So I can go through them if you would like. We do keep them per financial year because we use those stats related to the annual report. So just CCS, the average is just over an hour. Some of them are around 2 hours, and then the others might shorten that down. So they're looking at those. They're approximately 2 hours for a CCS meeting. IES on average, we've had some short meetings and some longer ones, so their average comes in at about an hour, but overall most of them are approximately 2 hours. There is a short one in there from August last year, which I think was a special, which has reduced that average. Ordinary council meetings average has been around 3 hours, and that's obviously because we've got a time cut off, so most of them sitting around between 4 up to 4, 3.5 to 4 hours. Special council meetings are then around the same. They average out to 2 hours, but that's because some are up around the 4 hours and others are only down around the hour mark, depending on what's on the agenda for a special council meeting. So we've got those stats, but it depends on how we present them to how useful they are. The average isn't always useful, especially for council meetings, special council meetings, because you can have some short ones if there's only one item that it's called for, but we can do averages and bits and pieces, so we can present that to council in a more useful term to have a look at if it's beneficial.
And next question, there's been a couple of things around as the YAC has been doing more, just questions around whether, you know, whether the chair of the YAC can, you know, can sign things or can meet with someone, or to what extent that's the, you know, that's the chair's, that's the mayor's role. Is that something that is decided at a committee level? Like, is that something that, because I know that Salisbury, for example, they've renamed their YAC to the Youth Council and they do a bit more with it and that sort of thing. I'm just wondering what our options are around that sort of thing.
So all of our committees, either the delegations or the terms of reference and the functions of those committees are set by council. At the moment, it's only our IES and CCS that have any delegated powers, really. So it would be up to this council to determine if there should be any delegations across to the Youth Advisory Committee, or whether or not the terms of reference and the functions of that committee would be increased from what they currently are.
Nathan?
What is, I know we have a lot of special council meetings. What's our streak sitting like at the moment? Are we 12 months where the special council meeting and council meeting 16? Just.
I couldn't quite get what, can you say that
So
again?
what's our streak? So for the last 12 months, have we had a special council meeting consistently every month?
So those stats are on the board, so the number of council meetings, and you can see for the last few financial years where we're sitting. So at the moment we've had 12 council meetings for the 2021 financial year to date.
Yeah. Haven't held ordinary council meetings.
So that's happened to the 20th of April. So that includes last week's special council meetings as well.
Yeah.
You know, the 17-18 financial year, we were at 15, so we were on par. 18-19 was 7, so there was a few less. 19-20 was still up at 10. And of course, our ordinary meetings are only one a month, so it will eventually come to 12 for each financial year.
So it'd be fair to say that we're averaging closer to a 50-50 split between ordinary council meetings and special council meetings, looking at that for the last 4 financial years, roughly, on average.
Without going into the detail of seeing in what months potentially they were called, that's probably a very broad breakdown. But of course, we've got our budget and things like that, potentially in some financial years where there's greater projects, and some of the big special projects where they are time critical, there'd be more special council meetings. So as a very rough assumption, you potentially assume the 18-19 financial year, there wasn't quite as many critical projects that potentially required special council meetings. But if you also look down to that financial year, the number of officers' reports at the ordinary council meetings was 178 versus then, you know, the special council meetings. So
we're getting through less reports in our ordinary council meetings. We've gone from 178 to 112.
Yeah.
So our efficiency rate's gone down.
So
It's nearly halved, nearly halved.
Because what would be really, really interesting is to show, you showed the calendar options. It would be really interesting to show the calendar actuals with the special council meetings sprinkled through, along with the ordinary council meetings, along with the council committees, because the reality is that's what we're doing already. So it'd be really interesting to see that snapshot. No, you know, it's not a big deal that it's not there, but I guess for me, it would be really interesting to see, because I mean the Mayor touched on it around efficiencies. It'd be really interesting to see us move into a consistent council meeting model every fortnight and drop down the committee obligations. For me, I see the importance of the IES and the CCS by all means, but I see a spot on a special council meeting, a calendar council meeting that is titled IES and CCS, where we do discuss those items, because there is value on an IES agenda as a standalone, but it can be absorbed in a council meeting and have its own spot. And equally with the CCS, I see the value in that. And then it would sort of touch on Kelvin's point, where it actually gets the debate done, because I'm exactly the same as you, Kelvin. And to be honest, I'm guilty of jumping in on those debates when the opportunity arises. But, you know, I'd much rather those opportunities not be there, because you're right, it is a lot more efficient to actually deal with these items when we deal with them. So, yeah, I see some merit in looking at the efficiencies we'd be able to pick up on that personally.
So I look at 178 matters that we were able to get through in ordinary council meetings, and now we can only get through 112. That's actually the crux of the matter.
So you just need to blame me and Cody for that.
I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not blaming anyone. However, the facts don't lie. We're nearly half of what we should be. We should be able to get through a lot more matters in a council meeting than what we do. And I'd put it to all the elected members why that might be. And my view is that we repeat, when we speak, we repeat the same conversation and don't necessarily add anything new. If we're not adding anything new, why are we speaking? If we're adding something new, that's different. The whole point of debate is to add something new and not say the same thing over and over again. And I'd argue that that's occurring, and maybe we could reflect on that and improve how many matters we actually get through in the existing structure rather than adding a regular council meeting. Because looking at that, we're not very efficient at all. And this is about getting through council matters and allowing our organisation to get on with the organisation and running the organisation. Yes, it's about debate, but it's not about senseless debate. And so if we're repeating each other just because we want to have a say, and we are allowed to have a say, however, if we're not contributing to the debate, why are we doing that? And those facts tell me that we're not getting through. We should be getting through 178 matters, frankly, and we're not. We should be getting through more matters in an ordinary council meeting than what we are currently doing. And, that's something we need to consider and hear what people are saying. But we could have 2 council meetings a month and we might still need special council meetings based on that inefficiency, frankly. And I think we can do better than that. Councillor Kosh?
Yeah, look, I agree with you. In fact, I'm going to moderate what I'm about to say. We need to be more efficient in what we do and not waste time intentionally. So I think we as all councillors need to be able to manage collectively the way that we debate and the way we manage our time and not intentionally slow things down.
Councillor Shanks, yep.
Yeah, I guess that's a bit of a broader opinion. What was on the agenda back in 2018, 2019, what was on the agenda 2017, 2018, how involved and engaged were the elected members of that term? Comparing 2 different terms and saying one needs to be as efficient as the other is a little bit of I get the sentiment, but what we're talking about here is there efficiencies given our current term that we can pick up with the structure that exists? And if it's to talk less in the chamber, well, I mean, good. I wish everyone the best of luck with that. But the fact is, we're here to represent the community. And if for whatever reason we're debating items and things are feeling like they need to be repeated or whatever, that will come down to the elected member's opinion on the night. So taking that away doesn't assist anything. It actually hinders.
So I beg to differ. I think that everyone has a right to have their say, but if you're not adding any new information, if you're just repeating what's already been said, that's not adding to the debate. You're still representing the community by having your say, but there doesn't need to be the repeated, and I would argue that there is a lot of repeated comments that doesn't add to the debate. So if you're representing the community, you should be adding to the debate in a fresh way. That creates strength to the debate. People have different views on this. They're not necessarily wrong. However, the facts don't lie. Previous councils, my reflections is everyone comes and provides very strong representation. I don't think there's any difference between this council or the previous council in regards to the personalities around the table and their desire and their passion. and their work ethic. I think everybody works very hard. However, I go back to those stats, and we're not looking too good in our ordinary council meeting. I think we can do better within our ordinary council meeting, and I think it needs to be said and needs to be talked about. We shouldn't be afraid to do it.
No, not at all. I mean, it's just we have 5 minutes every item, so. Yeah.
That's right.
They're different items, so to repeat, you have to be opening and closing a debate.
And then if you seek to speak again and again, so that happens sometimes. Do we need to do that? I'm not particularly convinced that it adds to the debate, but other people might have different views. We need to talk about that because these stats are not looking all that good as far as I'm concerned. If we're going to change and have 2 council meetings a month, I don't want to come back here next year and say, actually, we still need just as many special council meetings because we still can't get through them because we're still not adding to the debate and continuing to talk. And it's not about talking, it's about adding to the debate and making strong decisions. And you can do that. You can do that efficiently. And it doesn't strangle people or stifle people. You can speak quite succinctly, get your point across, and be very powerful in that. And you can still very effectively represent the community. So I think that's possible. Councillor Davies, and then Kate.
Yeah, so I think, I think what Councillor Goldstone was talking about before is one of the things around repeating that I'd be interested in, just around what things could go to, which things need to go back to council or which things come to the council as a noting report. I don't know what the balance of that is in, for example, the IES, but that would be to me the biggest sort of obvious repeat. I think there is a level of repetition that is just the nature of debate. There's sort of an irony in this discussion here. Several things have been repeated about 8 times, but that's not to say that it's bad to keep going over something, because sometimes that's just how it is to try to convince people or try to get your view across. But I do think, just looking at the delegations and just how much we could be doing on IES and CCS, for example, that what needs to come across as a full council debate, and is that something that maybe we could adjust based on how many of the councillors are at the meeting or something like that, rather than just being set in stone. Because I think it makes, if you've got 10 people attending the IES and then they make a decision, it's actually less representative if it goes to council and 9 councillors are there and the vote goes a different way. That's actually, the full council decision was already made and then it got changed, for example. Whereas as Councillor Goldstone was saying, if you've got like 5 people on a committee and it makes sense to, those few people bring up what was said to give clarity and then the debate happens, that makes sense to me. But maybe more we could do around that topic.
Kate?
So I was just going to add that while the meeting regulations set that members have 5 minutes to speak, that is something that council has the option to change as part of the code of practice. So if the speaking time is something that you feel is currently inhibiting council and committee meetings, you do have the ability to reduce that time as part of the code of practice for council and committee meetings. So you might choose to limit that to 3 minutes, or the right of reply might be limited, etc. That is something that council has the ability to alter as part of the code of practice. And the agenda structure is probably something that could be potentially looked at if for decision reports versus information reports versus then the committee recommendations. That is also something that council can set as part of the code of practice.
Councillor Goldstone?
Just getting off that a bit, are we having more deputations now than there used to be, or has it been pretty consistent?
We have, Oh, that's a really interesting one. We have public open forum, which is a total of 20 minutes according to the Code of Practice in total. And depending on how many people want to speak, we're fairly flexible in allowing people to address council. And then there's deputations in addition to that. Now, not all councils have both of those. I quite like that. I think people in the community appreciate addressing council, and most people, I think we've only ever had one person that perhaps needed some guidance around respectful behaviours, but most people are really good at keeping themselves to time, etc. So and most people are also really good at understanding the code of rules, and I haven't found that certainly people in the gallery abuse that. I don't think they do. So I think if we were to change that, I think that would be a backward step maybe in my personal view. I think it encourages that interaction. It is formal, but this meeting is formal. Most people understand that. I think the code of practice and how long people speak is an interesting one. That's certainly for council to consider. And I think this particular group is really quite reasonable in allowing people to put their point of view across if they feel the need. It is important that everyone feels they can have a say. I think that does occur generally. But it is an interesting one. Certainly what you're saying, Councillor Davies, around noting reports, information reports, those sorts of things. Kate, do you want to just expand on what Cody was sort of talking about and how that might improve efficiencies, or, what that might look like?
So with the committee recommendations in particular, so different councils do structure the flow from committees to councils very differently. This council is one that we see all committee decisions flow through as part of the council agenda, even if they are for noting. Not all councils do that. If a decision is made at a committee level and there's no requirement for a council decision, they're not always form part of the formal council agenda. There are advantages and disadvantages, of course, to doing that. Some councils, on the other hand, will flow the entire report through from committee to council, which, again, there's some advantages and disadvantages, especially given the size of our current agendas and given the majority of members sit on part of the committees. So that's definitely a double up in that space, and all members have got access to all information. Those that are just for noting from a committee, if it doesn't form part of the council decision, you don't have to have it form part of the council agenda. However, then you don't have, I guess, the transparency in the council agenda that council has turned its mind to and seen all of those decisions and informations from the committees. So how the agendas are structured is up to the committee and to council, sorry, not the committee. And that is set as per the code of practice. So that'll dictate how they are done. Council does, as part of the regulations, have the option to move items en bloc, which of course is always stressed with caution. Yeah. I do see some other councils using them for information reports, but again, that's something that should be done with a great deal of caution, because you don't have the ability to show that council has turned their mind to each of those items. Sure. It is a strategy some councils use, and it has worked in their favour and it has worked against them in different items. So,
hasn't there been some complaints through Ombudsman around en bloc, and it potentially exposes council to not making an informed decision if you're voting for something en bloc.
Yeah, and it's not being able to show the debate in the chamber is something that has been criticised, whether it's moved en bloc or not. And I think we have seen that with particular items over recent years with councils where they were presented, but they were unable to show the debate. So council was unable to show that it had really turned its mind to those items. Councils have in the past, used the ability where, if somebody speaks for a motion, if there's somebody that doesn't speak against, the debate is then stopped. If there's no one against, then not everybody needs to speak for a motion. But to that same criticism, council was then unable to show that it has turned its mind to the item and all aspects of the item. So
there are some councils that, and when I first got on council and was a chair, it was suggested to me that you could say, is there any dissent? And if there's no dissent, it's taken as carried. Now, that's a risky position to take because you can't demonstrate that you've actually debated. And I know some councils do that. I've never done that because I actually think it's it's bad practice. But yeah, I do see that occurs elsewhere. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a good practice or not. What do you think about that?
I think a reduction of time would be a first step and would be a far better approach to start. If we're seeing the number of items, we're just not getting there, the length of times council meetings are taken, and my experience is the time it takes to get through items here does exceed that of my experience elsewhere. To stifle the debate, I think, would be unfortunate, but at the same time, where do you find that balance in making sure there has been enough debate in the chamber without then jeopardising the ability to get through the business that's needed for council to function and to reduce those number of meetings for you as members? There are definitely abilities to having a committee structure over 2 council meetings a month. There are some councils that do that. I think it's a handful in this state have 2 meetings a month and reduction of committees. But you also then don't have the focus to those items and potentially have the time to have greater debate in a committee meeting versus a council meeting. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend either of those approaches to start with, but maybe the consideration is 5 minutes really required, or even as a trial to potentially reduce that speaking time, is 3 minutes still efficient to be able to really debate those items? And I guess that's for you all to turn your mind to.
Councillor Davies.
So one idea I was thinking of was similar to how at the IAS we have a one item that's, I think it's items from previous minutes or whatever, where there's just lists all of the stuff that's currently
business
arising. If we did something, for example, for like noting council noting committee reports or whatever, that instead of going through and moving and seconding and all of that, there was a list of note reports there, and councillors had the option of at that item of bringing up, actually I'd like to mention this one, or something along those lines. That could be, because those are ones that don't need a decision. And we do, I think a lot of why the special council meetings have more reports on there this year is probably because we get through the officers' reports, and then when we get to the special council meeting, we go through 20 different, noting things. So if all of that was not a decision for us to make, was just a list of noting reports, and then that was an item so that people had the opportunity to bring something up, maybe that would cut down a bunch of decisions. I don't know.
Kate?
Would it be worthwhile for us to do a little bit of research back to those officers' reports to see how many of them were for noting versus how many of them were for decisions at councils?
So if you would en bloc noting reports, it's still on bloc. Yeah, what do people think of that idea? We might go around the room initially. So we've got some ideas from Councillor Davies. I think they're useful. Councillor Koch?
So you just want my view of the world?
Sorry?
You want my view of the world?
Well, just in regard to noting. So, for example, we have a series of noting, thanks for the update, it's noted and received or whatever, and there's 7 of them, and that's one decision.
Yeah, I think that's probably, that can be worked, if that's all it is, that would be fine.
And that would be classed as an en bloc
Yeah, but
decision.
I think that a lot of the decisions from the CES and the IES are recommendations to council. So that you need to make, they're not noting, they're actually recommendations, and councils need to make a decision because it's on that. So it's just the noting ones.
It's the noting ones. So
Yeah,
it's
potentially.
delineating what's noting, and there's quite a few that are noting, just to update council on matters.
But in most cases, when we get to those, we just note them anyway. So we we just a couple of seconds and they're done. If they're just noting.
Not necessarily. Depends on the matter.
No, there's difference if something is recommended that we make a decision on and just noting. Okay.
So might go around.
Actually, could I just talk about my
sure.
view of the world?
You
I'm
certainly
quite happy
have.
with the existing structure because you get a chance to flesh out those items and your mind's in that space, whether it's an IES issue or a CC, so there's a distinction between the two, so you're in that space, so that's good. I prefer only one council meeting. I think councils should just get on with it and not deliberately filibuster and cause the meetings to drag on and use tactics to cause us for the meeting just to drag on for theatrics or whatever, because that is holding our community to ransom. So I think we as if we see that happening as a council by an individual councillor who, and it's deliberate, we should be doing something about it, because it is holding our community to ransom. So I'm concerned about our reputation. There is a reputational risk when people deliberately do that. So there's some big issues here, and I quite like the idea of reducing, say, the final response to maybe a minute. That would be fine, but I do get concerned when there's the deliberate filibustering.
I think 3 minutes. I think a minute's probably not long enough.
Just finish it.
I think most people can get out what they need to say in 3 minutes. So I think that's a good idea from Kate. Councillor Goldstone?
Yeah, I think what Cody was talking about's got merit. We just have to be a bit careful when, like you said, you're talking about en bloc decisions.
Yeah.
But it probably could be worked through. As far as the 3 minutes is concerned, couldn't agree more. Some councils have already adopted it, including the Adelaide City Council, and it hasn't, restricted members from getting their view across. Because if you add up 5 minutes for everyone here for one item, that's an hour almost. Plus the mover and seconder. So yeah, I'd support the 3 minutes. I think it's a good idea.
Councillor Little?
Yeah, I quite like the noting block myself, and I also agree about the 3 minutes. What I found this time in chamber, that I cannot believe sometimes when we have a mover and a seconder, there's no debate, and then you go back to the mover and he has another 5 minutes, or she has another 5 minutes. To me, it seems deliberately wasting time sometimes. I think when the point's already moot and that point is going to be voted on unanimously, why do we have to keep going back for another 5 minutes chat? So I could never understand it. Anyway, I like the 3 minute rule myself, because I think it's 3 minutes to talk about it in, 3 minutes to talk about it out. If you can't get your point across in 6 minutes as a mover, well, you haven't done your homework properly.
I think the regulations prescribe mover and reply, so I don't think we can get away with not allowing someone to close the debate, even though there might not have been debate. Yeah. I don't know if we can stop people from doing that. Is that just? I'm just going to check with Kate on that, but I don't think we can.
I don't think we can. I think they've got the ability to be able to reply, unless we're looking at, the no dissent as a strategy. And again, there's some cautious in that, which would basically stop the debate. We've always got the formal motions to put the question, if there is an issue with the debate, if people aren't getting to the point, if it's not respectful debate, you've got a formal motion to kind of stop the debate in that format, to put the question. I'll take it on notice whether or not we've got the ability to stop in reply, but I don't believe there'd be that ability. It would only be the time frame that you could potentially build into the code of practice for the right of reply.
Councillor Hughes, want to add anything?
No, I agree with Councillor Little, I think, and the other councillors. I think that's all sounding quite good. And a lot of councils and boards of very large companies have debate agendas and non-debate, and they don't pull items out to debate, and those that they note and do that en bloc. Barossa Council's been doing that for a very, very long time, and that way they concentrate on those areas that they want to debate. I think it's really important that our council meetings are structured so the officers' reports that are the most important go first. Like at the moment, we've got our committee meetings, and a lot of that has already been debated and at the back of the agenda, which I think is really important. So it's how the agendas are set up in the first place, I think is really important. Sometimes, and I think it's good, the officers' reports that we have been getting a really high standard. But I think that if they are for noting, which the number are as well, whether that importance isn't as high as those that we've got other decisions to make. So another way of looking at those agendas. But I think some fine tuning, as Councillor Davies and others have said, I think would be good. And if there is no dissent, I think the right of reply is something. I try and be careful not to, or I do try and limit my speaking time as well. But I think that right of reply is my understanding is it's really only there if there is some dissent. So and you're not supposed to bring any new business into it anyway.
No.
But also the fact I think we don't use the formal motions enough as well, as been mentioned by our governance officer. I think that's a really important tool, and it's a tool to be used and to help control things too. So I think the formal motions is very important too.
Councillor Shanks.
Just a question. The 2018, 2019, 2017, 2018, did they have a time limit like what we do?
No.
No?
No.
For the meeting length?
So if it was a stacked agenda, the elected body could just run it until midnight or 1 a.m. if they needed. Yeah. So that's also something to look at it when we're taking on board numbers as well. Just picking up efficiencies there. We're doing ours and cutting it off at 10:30, 11. The previous body did have the option to go to midnight, 1 o'clock if they saw the importance to do so. I personally don't see the value of that for the human brain personally. But I do understand when those agendas come through and a lot of noting or a lot of recommendations, acceptance and it's administration stuff, our administration stuff we need to do. I do see the value of that. I also do note that, a lot of us actually do not always use our 5 minutes. I mean, you might turn around and say, well, Councillor Shanks, you do, but I try to use the time and try to speak as efficiently as I can. But, it's up to us to use those times. If you're wanting to change to 3 minutes, the reality is that all 10 elected members aren't using those 5 minutes anyway. And the reality is that when it comes to, as Councillor Hughes and Little rightfully pointed out, if it's been moved and seconded, there's no debate. We usually just give the nod because 9 times out of 10, that's usually what happens. So, I am a little bit cautious where we turn around and we say, well, let's discipline everyone by going to 3 minutes because we think there's a 2-minute efficiency we could pick up over 10 elected members. That's saying that each one of us speak 5 minutes every time. And here I go repeating myself, so I'm being cautious on that. So those efficiencies where we're talking about minutes, I think we just need to be cautious because there are the big ticket items where I will personally use my 5 minutes, and there'll be other items where I won't need to. taking that away, thinking that we're going to be able to up our number to mimic something that only exists because arguably there's efficiencies there that went to over 12, 1 o'clock, whatever. I think we're missing the point. I think what I'm talking about is around structuring our council meetings so that they can provide the platforms that Councillor Koch talked about, an IES section, a CCS section, where we do talk about these reports and we, picking up on what Kelvin spoke about, we do debate them in real time. I personally come in with the same head every workshop and every council meeting, so I don't necessarily swap and change because I don't see the difference in some items that we come to as a council anyway, and then also come to as an IES. There's a lot of similarities there, picking up on what the Mayor said about maybe not efficiently using the IES. So, yeah, for me, it's not a political thing, it's an efficiency thing. And I don't think our current structure, although it might be good, doesn't have room for improvement. So that's my thoughts.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I think a lot's been said that I agree with, but, we as councillors have a responsibility when we become an elected member. And this council supplied every councillor that is supposed to be here tonight with the opportunity to be able to be on Zoom, whether it's Victor Harbour or Tibooburra or wherever it needs to be. And these things we're talking about are very, very valid, and I hear what Nathan says about the way everybody should be given a chance to have their words. But how many people are listening on Zoom? Do we know that?
I get told by my husband every single time. He's very accurate. It's around average of 9.
Oh, are the elected members that are not here tonight, even though they may be one might be on leave of absence, but I think when you become an elected member, you should be interested in spending the hour or 2 hours to be on board at a meeting like this. I mean, sometimes I hear so much crap that I really think, what am I doing here? I could be sitting around the campfire like I was last night, drinking port, talking to the guys and listening to the bats flying around and everything.
Don't touch the bats, it's all
but
recommended.
I have come back from there today after having 2 fantastic days. 42 emails, 12 from the public. What are you doing about fixing up the problems, as Councillor Koch said? We're not respected in our community at the present time. Whatever can come out of tonight, and with the facts that Kate is putting up and so forth here, the biggest thing at the moment, and especially in the position we are, is the budget. I went home the other night and said, I think I'm going to go and pick up Paul in the morning and we're going to go to bloody Tibooburra and sit in the pub for 3 days because all the good work that him and his team are doing. And we had the poorest attendance at the budget meeting ever. I mean, it's just like we have a meeting every day on the phone. And I certainly read everyone, but luckily there's a thing on the top called the delete button, so they go. So I don't want to do that. I want to think, well, what Cody said or what Kelvin said is great and so forth, and why all this la, 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 la. Oh, but, you should put this one there and so forth. If I want to know any more about the legal proceeding part, I'll call Kate, and every one of us can call Kate and get that information. But when Sam and Ryan and Erin and everybody put reports to it and that sort of thing, I want to see that every elected member in this chamber is putting their heart and soul in that decision, not saying, boiler water. I've never heard so many portable orders in my life of being involved with local government. I can't believe it, and so forth. We've got to stop these tactics, as Councillor Koch said. To me, they're tactics. They really are. And I think we've just got to try a lot harder, and then the community's not going to send me 12 in 2 days to say, Sambo, what are you doing? You know, and some of those people are really identities of this community that are no mugs. And, you know, they're saying, well, hang on a minute, you know, why can't you do it better? I want to try and do it better, but we've all got to do it better. You know, I don't want to see all this shit, all this stuff about slinging off at the CEO and the mayor. I respect you. You're my mayor, and I respect the CEO. And we've got to get used to it. We've got Henry now for the next 3 years. If we want him for the next 6 years, let's respect him. I don't want to see the stuff that I see on this phone, you know. And, you know, we've got this thing that we can look at. We've got we can be connected. I mean, are you the two here, Vallelonga and Tully? Are you on the board back there? Because how are you? We've got to have everybody on board.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Councillor Goldstone.
One thing that I forgot to mention when we're talking about efficiencies, and that's the issue of members asking questions at meetings. A lot of what I hear, those questions could be directed to the staff before the meetings, and that would free up time at the meetings because...
I traditionally, at the beginning of the term, I think for 2 years, sent emails out encouraging members to ask questions before the meeting. I think all members are well aware of that. Members have a right to ask questions at the meeting. My view is that you have the agenda 5 days before a council meeting. Yes, it's over a weekend. Yes, we have to make ourselves available and read that agenda. I also know that staff are available on the Monday and Tuesday to answer those questions. So yes, absolutely, that would save a lot of time during debate, asking questions that could easily be addressed before the meeting, and that would save a lot of time. You still get your question answered. If you've got a question about whatever the matter is and you get it answered, if it's not answered adequately, then you go back to the officer. You can even meet with the officer. I know that there are many members across the state that actually have meetings with officers face to face to discuss matters coming up on council agendas. So that's always a really good option. But the regulations allow for questions with or without notice, and members have a right to do that. My view is if you could ask those questions before the meeting, you still get them answered. You're not getting stifled. You're still getting an answer, but maybe you're not asking them at a meeting. So you're not asking that question at a meeting. But you don't have to ask it at the meeting. As long as it gets answered, that's the main thing. If it doesn't get answered, that's a different story. Okay, where are we up to? Any other discussion? Nathan?
Sorry, I can feel the room, but I'm going to take advantage of the workshop here. Just with the questions, I guess some of those questions that I completely agree, some of those questions can be asked via email, through staff. Some of the most constructive conversations I have in council are with the people standing behind me and around in staff. So they do allow me to get in front, but the fact is we get the agenda that comes through on the Thursday and we do our best to digest everything, and some do slip through the cracks. Some other ones that are asked are actually with me. What I do is I get asked some questions through ratepayers, and for me it's quick and easy to ask those questions publicly so they can tune in and they get the answers in real time. And they understand that I am actually asking questions on their behalf. So I think there's warrant for both opinions there. And I also believe that, as you've seen, I do ask some of those questions via email. You've seen all them, my RFIs. So yes, I completely agree there's efficiencies there. But, you know, we're clawing at minutes when I feel like we should be looking at hours. That's where I feel like the conversation's going here, and I feel like there's efficiencies here in structure over the minute grabs. So, but yeah, look, we'll see.
Thank you. There's no other discussion. I think I might wrap this up. Thanks everyone for coming along. I think there's been some really good ideas. We'll certainly go away. CEO, do you want to make any final comments?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I just wanted to, one observation through the conversation is the number of reports for noting as compared for decision making, and I picked up a thread there whether or not there's another change there in terms of maybe some of those matters can be circulated by way of email information, not necessarily by way of reports, to help reduce the number of items on the meetings. And I'm more than happy to receive feedback on items that you would be scratching your head and thinking, why do we have a report on that? Because we don't write reports for the sake of writing reports. I'm keen to make sure that the elected members are informed, but I'm also hearing that, and I know that we're all challenged in terms of the agenda time, so that might be something that I'll talk to Karen about, and depending on where this conversation goes, that might be something that as an executive team we think through, and believe me, we do actually, when we go through the agenda, we work through which items need to go to council, which should and better be managed through committees, but more the questions might be why write the report?
Just a comment around transparency, and I think having reports and agendas that the community can read. It's not just about us and staff. It's also about people in the community who do take an active interest in reports, and some noting reports keep people updated. So even if those noting reports were presented at committees rather than council, but they're still there as a transparent record that this matter has come through, and this is what this is what council's doing. And otherwise, if it was just by email, the community never get to see some of those updates. I think they can be quite useful, but how we manage that is probably a good question. So, yeah, all right. Oh, yes, Brian.
We've just heard from the CEO, and back here is the team.
Absolutely.
Right? This is a workshop, right?
Yes.
When can we hear from the team? If Sam wants to say to me, listen, Sample, you're not allowed to do this. She said, when do we really get to hear from the team? We hear from the CEO, and this is a workshop. I don't know, I feel that somehow or other, if we've got to ask any one of them back there, straight away they got to think, shit, how am I going to answer this? I want to answer it properly or whatever it may be. But as this is a workshop, wouldn't it be nice to hear their personal opinion of what they think of us, or is that out of order?
I think it's out of order, and I think it's putting staff in a very impossible position. It's a loaded question, but I'm sure you can have meetings, Brian, with individual staff members and hear their thoughts, but we might leave it at that, Henry. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a great night. Thanks, Kate.